feelings are less comfortable for the Japanese as a culture to express because it's a collectivistic culture, a unit or a group where there's a prescribed way of living.
Hi, I'm Kim Tolson and I'm the traveling therapist. It's my passion to teach therapists how to navigate online private practices and multiple income streams so they can travel the world. I'm a digital nomad with a virtual insurance-based private therapy practice and a multi-six-figure coaching business. I'm obsessed with entrepreneurship and developing tools that can help therapists live an adventurous lifestyle. In this podcast, I will discuss my journey as a digital nomad. I'll chat with other traveling therapists and help you navigate the complexities of running an online insurance-based practice. I'm so glad to have you with me on this journey. Welcome everybody to another episode of The Traveling Therapist. I'm here today with Sheryl Smith. Her traveling story is a little bit different. She traveled Asia and specifically through Japan, and this was actually before she became licensed as a therapist, but I invited her on because I want her to share what she learned there about the culture, and now that she is a therapist, having that perspective I think can help other people that want to travel through Asia. So Sheryl, I'd like to just welcome you and turn it over to you and have you share a little bit about your story and what got you to where you are today, and then we'll take it from there.
Well, thank you, Kim. I'm so excited to be here and excited to be a part of the traveling therapist group. I'm completely interested and look forward later on to traveling as a therapist. And it brought me back to a time in my life when, at a younger age, I was a counselor on a hotline. And just was really interesting in counseling, not being clear that I'd end up a therapist later in life. But I met a psychologist there, Kevin Flanagan, in Rockford, Illinois, and we started to talk and became friends. And he let me know that he got a job offer in Okinawa at the University of Okinawa, Ryukyu Daigaku, which is the name. And I was intrigued and fascinated, and we started talking about cross-cultural psychology and what it must be like to reach people in need from other cultures. And I was just fascinated, so much so that I ended up traveling to Japan to stay with Kevin and to be a student as I started to learn what I wanted to do and how I wanted to broaden my horizons. As a counselor, I'm also a mediator, as somebody who wanted to communicate with not just Americans, but people all over the world. And so Kevin was fluent in Japanese. He became fluent in Japanese. And I sat in on his classes at the university, and when I got off the plane, I remember feeling, okay, there's nothing familiar here.
Wow.
How do I connect? What do I do? And I started to think of the humanness of everyone and started to focus on the sameness of individuals and what the needs of people are all over the world. And when you start thinking like that, you think, well, we're all human beings with thoughts, feelings, needs. And it became easier as I started to sit in on classes with Kevin. And he also had groups after class. And the students would come and we would have tea, which is an important part of the culture. And we would talk about what the students needed to talk about. And I want to say that Okinawa, for those of you that don't know, is a Japanese prefecture, and it's comprising more than 150 islands in the East China Sea between Taiwan and Japan's mainland. It's known for the tropical climate, the broad beaches and coral reefs, and a lot of World War II sites. Kadena Air Base is in Okinawa, and it is absolutely beautiful and breathtaking. And so each day I would go and I would listen to the students, and I started to learn a little bit more about the culture. And the Japanese culture, which is shaped by Chinese influence, Confucianism, Buddhism, Shintoism, is a culture that has very few words that have feelings. So feelings are less comfortable for the Japanese as a culture to express because it's a collectivistic culture, a unit or a group where there's a prescribed way of living. For example, you go to school, you're quite diligent, it's very easy to get into a university. It's sort of chosen for you. You pick a major, before you finish university, you're already swooped up by a company and you stay there for life and you get married and have children. It's a prescription, and it's a prescription based on a concept in the Japanese culture called amae or amaeru, which is kind of an indulgence, like a parent-child relationship, womb-like environment where you really are comforted and taken care of. So that expressing feelings and creating an individualistic life is not traditionally part of the culture, although Western infusion has been more and more relevant in Japan. And so there's been challenges where people are saying, this isn't a fit for me, this lifestyle, this prescription. And some other important concepts too regarding the culture are what's called saving face.
Okay.
It's behavior and communication that tends to be informed the concept of face. It refers to a person's reputation, pride, honor, and can be saved or lost depending on the circumstances. So the people of Japan tend to behave in a very deliberate manner with restraint, and preserving that reputation is so important. So you can imagine that counseling and saying something different or having such a restrictive vocabulary in the Japanese language is difficult if you have mental health issues.
Absolutely. Wow,
Yeah,
that's so interesting.
yeah,
And I just wonder how, as a therapist, from this perspective, like an Americanized perspective, how, well, I guess we meet people culturally where they are, and we don't want to, try to influence them to be more Americanized. But I wonder if that was tough, if that's tough for you. I know you do coaching there as well with people, and I just like, how do you manage that dichotomy?
Well, one of the things that we started to do is to increase feelings vocabulary in the English language. So when Japanese would speak English, they were out of their Japanese language, and there was a freedom because they were using another language and they could identify in a broader sense and out of the fishbowl that they felt that they were in and needed to strictly follow. And there's a real need for connection and to see, am I the only one in the Japanese culture? And so I started working at a company too in Tokyo, not only in Okinawa, forming groups. And so people in groups felt like, and we started with a topic that was safer, not real interpersonal stuff. And in speaking about topics and practicing the English language, a connection was created so the Japanese could just practice talking instead of presenting a face, presenting a prescribed image of what they are supposed to do repetitively day in and day out. And the most common mental health issues in Japan now, PTSD, ADHD, depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and suicidal ideation, they're pretty pronounced. And there are mental health practitioners now that work in Japan. You have to become certified, but you can be master's level. And that they're most comfortable as a culture with CBT, DBT, and family-focused therapy. Anything psychodynamic or analytic is not comfortable for the most part. And in order to build trust with the Japanese, because I also have done business contracts working with the Japanese at a different time in my life. And I learned that building trust with the Japanese, it's very different. It's about conversing back and forth for a long period of time about the weather, things that you do on a daily basis. And the Japanese person needs a long time to be able to sit with you and feel comfortable with you. So building the alliance as we do in the States with our client looks very different with the Japanese client.
Oh, I could imagine. It sounds extremely different.
Yeah,
A different rapport building.
and
Yeah.
you have to disclose more about yourself, of course, without having inappropriate boundaries, but more of a disclosure and more of a creation of a kinship that the Japanese feel safe enough to start veering off into their own individual plights.
Wow, that is so interesting. Yeah. So in an individual session or individual sessions, I guess, how long until you would actually feel like you could start getting into therapeutic content with someone in Japan versus here, the first session I'm doing an assessment, I'm already sort of doing clinical work, with them, and just curious how that process worked.
Well, I think it depends on the client and their
Right.
level of urgency with their mental health presentation. Some people have less urgency, therefore, it's important to check in and go at a particular pace that the client feels comfortable and you can ask questions. Sometimes it's hard for the Japanese person to be honest and open. That's a different experience because of the collectivism, because of the face that needs to be presented. And so sometimes the counselor and the group leader, I would find myself sharing stories about things in my life so that the Japanese could understand that I too have a human experience, that I'm understanding, that I can put myself in their shoes, that I can anticipate their needs. One of the things in the culture, the Japanese anticipate, it's part of the MIA that I spoke about, the womb-like environment, the Japanese anticipate your needs. For example, if you go to the home of a Japanese person, they bring you something to eat. They decide what it is that you need. If it's warm out, they'll bring a cold drink, they'll bring something sweet, they take your shoes. They're constantly like a mother anticipating your needs. And I think they look for in a therapist somewhat that you can anticipate and help them to articulate their needs because they need that sort of support. And that becomes more of a corrective emotional experience. Very different concept, right, Kim?
Absolutely. Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that is so very interesting though.
But the groups, I think, were more comfortable in general for the Japanese because other Japanese people could feel assured they're seeing their fellow group members also doing the same thing. And then they would follow. Japanese feel more comfortable following and assimilating that way. And so I learned an awful lot about concepts in Buddhism, in Shintoism, of everything has a life force or kami, and that life force in an inanimate or animate object should be respected and should be given attention. And it's a sensitivity that we really don't have here, and that it presents itself like the swinging taxi door that automatically opens, anticipating that you have a lot of packages, about everybody saying welcome when you come into a store. The sensitivities, the etiquette is really highly pronounced, and all those things can really help if you're a therapist in Japan to be aware of, and also to bow and to give the appropriate space. that does not include affection or anything
Mm-hmm.
like Westerners are used to. But the Japanese are fascinated with Western concepts. And I think as the trust and rapport is built more and more, especially with English, there would be more disclosure.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Now, do you work with people from Asia over here now? I think you had mentioned that you're doing some coaching. I'm just curious how
It's
that's
it's
since you
something
have
that
so
I
much
want to,
experience.
yeah, it's something that I'd like to start.
Oh, okay.
Right now I'm working at Kelsey Roofing Counseling in Bloomingdale, Illinois. A wonderful practice and, multi-focused. And it's something that I see myself coming back to working with the Japanese. And I also traveled Asia and, there were just many differences within each of the Asian cultures that really lend itself to meeting and being open to, especially because COVID is worldwide, to connecting with somebody that can help with things like PTSD and um, attention deficit, etc. Like a huge need. And when I traveled to Japan, I rolled my clothes in a duffel bag and I thought, oh, I don't have enough, or I don't have this, or I don't have that. And it's amazing how hospitable the culture was. And I soon learned what I needed there, I didn't need in the States, and vice versa. And
Mm,
you just start adapting and again, start focusing on what's the same about us,
mm-hmm.
our human needs, for socialization, for interaction, to be understood and heard, and then starting to share your differences and branching and broadening and having this fascinating experience.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, a lot of times on this podcast, we talk about people that are just traveling to different locations but still seeing their clients back in the United States. And I'm just curious, do you have any advice or suggestions if somebody actually wants to go over to Asia and work and get immersed in the culture there and see like clients in Japan or other Asian parts around Asia? Do you have any advice on how somebody might do that if they don't want to bring their current caseload with them and they want to go over there and work with the population and the culture?
I found a lot of support with the embassy in Japan. There were a lot of organizations for Americans. There are clinical psychologists in Japan. Just a whole bunch of American connections that can be made to learn how to answer the questions that you just asked.
Gotcha. Okay. So reaching out to the embassy would be a good place to start if somebody wanted to find opportunities to work as an American over there with the
Right, and to
population.
to make sure that all of the certifications and licenses, there's the regulations there are not as strict as, what we've got, but there are certain important certifications that you need to understand. And I think it's easy enough to navigate from what I remember in Japan. And
Okay.
yeah. Hmm.
Hmm. So I know it's been some time since you've been there, but I'm just curious, were there regulations like working over there? Did you have to get like something equivalent to a visa while you were there? Or do you remember how all that worked?
So I had a visa, but I was studying under a clinical psychologist who
Okay.
was at a university, and I also just started becoming proficient in Japanese, which helped. And so I was really, similar to a supervisee in the States. That's how I was connected there.
Nice.
And there's a lot of need for English teachers too that can also create groups with a topic, a mental health topic as well. That's always appreciated and needed, and sometimes is a first step for the Japanese to start considering whether they need further mental health treatment.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. So what is it like over there if somebody is bipolar? Like, is it an accepted diagnosis? How does one get treatment over there? Is psychiatry, a common normal thing, or I'm just curious how that works
So yeah,
culturally?
psychiatry is a common normal thing, especially the suicide rate is high in Japan,
Oh, wow.
and it's very troubling. And the highest suicide rate would be for right after high school through early adulthood. And there's definitely psychiatry, medication, plus psychotherapy, again, usually in the modalities CBT, DBT, family focused. But there's a group of individuals who don't perhaps feel like they fit into the norm that they're supposed to fit in. There's a growing LGBTQ population and support. And sometimes, because of the dearth of feeling words and just the shame that's connected with going outside the box, people do not reach out and unfortunately die by suicide at an alarming rate. So psychiatry and psychotherapy needs to grow
Wow,
and
interesting.
and become more normalized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because when you said that, I was curious. Is it like, is that the age of onset for like a depressive disorder, or is it more like this like suppressing of emotions and, not being able to be an individual that is leading to these higher rates of suicide, or, a combination of the two? It's just so interesting.
Yeah, well, I certainly think biology and biochemical factors
Mm-hmm.
an important part, and also the family's role traditionally has been to try and place the person back into the mold.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know,
Right.
discussions, creative solution, that isn't usual and
Interesting.
may not work for certain people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, of course.
we
Yeah,
all know,
gosh.
as we all know. Yeah.
Yes, right. Oh my gosh. That is so interesting. What was your perspective on like substance use disorders over there, alcoholism, drug use? I'm a certified substance abuse counselor, and I've read research on, genetically, maybe the Asian ethnicity or however we want to say it, they basically are not as predisposed to addiction as maybe other ethnicities. I've read research around that, so I'm just curious, like, what was your experience with that, or currently your experience with that, with the Asian culture?
Right. Well, so my understanding, Kim, was that the Asian physiologically had more of a predisposition for alcohol abuse disorders. And in fact,
Really?
this was my understanding back then. And one of the ways that the Japanese man after work would quote unquote relax is to go out with his business associates and drink sake
Mm-hmm.
and drink a lot. And that drinking, forgetting the day's problems, and staggering on the street was something that was more normalized. And
Interesting.
so that alcohol addiction was more covered up in the culture. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but you could drink away your troubles and wake up and go back to work, be productive, and do it all over again. So I think there's definitely a concern there. On the other hand, there's a lot of functional alcoholism,
Mm-hmm.
from my understanding. But yeah.
Yeah.
But you mentioned your understanding is that the Asians don't have a predisposition to alcohol abuse.
That genetically they're less likely to become chemically dependent genetically is the research I've read, but maybe I'm not remembering that correctly. It's been a long time since I did my training for my substance abuse degree, but yeah, that was my understanding that genetically they're just like less predisposed to become addicted, not maybe abuse it, but to become addicted.
Well, you could be
Um,
right. I think there's a higher tolerance
yes.
and an ability to drink,
Mm-hmm.
become very drunk, and then function.
Right.
And again,
Exactly. Right.
it's not seen as a problem, it's seen as a stress reliever that's acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's always been so interesting to me. Okay. Hmm. So I'm assuming chemical dependency treatment or substance use disorder treatment there is probably not very readily available based on what you're saying.
I don't know because it's not an area
Mm-hmm.
that I focused on or learned about then or
Yeah.
now. So I don't know, and it's a great question.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. It makes me want to go research it a little bit more.
Yeah.
So what else can you tell us about, just if let's say a therapist wants to just keep their caseload and go live in Japan or one of the Asian countries, any other advice around where to go or, based on your experience, did you have a favorite place you went to? I'd just be curious to
When
hear about that.
I started out in Okinawa, and ended, I went to Tokyo and I visited Kyoto, Osaka, Shikoku. They have beautiful shrines, beautiful temples, and traveling all over Japan changed my life and deepened my spirituality. And so, and from there, I flew to other areas like in Taiwan, China, the Philippines, and that was great. But just being able to travel in Japan, the one thing I had to get used to is everything is a lot smaller,
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
and a lot of the homes don't have a private bath, and you go to the bathhouses and you separated by men and women, but you shower first. You have to get very, very clean before you take a bath in Japan. That's the way it's done, and just filled with rituals and heightened experiences of beauty and charm and aesthetic. So there's just it's just crowded.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
especially Tokyo.
Mm.
But you can
Mm-hmm.
take the bullet train, which is so unbelievably fast from Tokyo to Kyoto or Osaka, and have a really enjoyable time. And you stay in ryokans, they're called, little tiny hotel-like, quaint little places to
Oh, wow.
hang your hat and, yeah, wear kimonos, and yeah, I really loved it.
Oh, that's amazing. So, did you have a very favorite place, or just were all of them just amazing?
Well, I think Kyoto, the Zen and rock gardens there,
Oh, wow.
because you sat, talk about self-care that we always talk about at therapists. I mean, you sit for hours. It's quieter than you can imagine, and you look at this perfectly coiffed garden, and are with you become meditative so quickly and easily.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Such a beautiful place, I bet. Yeah, gosh.
with very clear and clean water, and there's just a lot of respect.
Mm-hmm.
Japanese are very respectful to each other. Crime level is much lower. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh
Yeah,
my
yeah.
gosh.
I feel very grateful to be able to share this with you, and to now be a therapist, and see what I could see how I can reconnect, because I got some really powerful training at the University of Okinawa, and also I spent some time at Tokyo University, which is the number one university in Japan.
Wow, that's amazing. Do you think you'll ever go back?
It would be great. You have inspired me, as
Oh,
a therapist, to figure out, some of my traveling ideas for the future.
oh wow. I'd love to, if you ever go back and you're there and you want to have another interview, that'd be amazing.
Oh, thanks, Kim. Yeah,
Yeah,
sure,
yeah.
sure would.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. I think this is going to really help people that want to travel that part of the world. I personally have always been intimidated thinking about going, over to Asia just because the culture is so different. I think it's probably kept me away, but hearing you talk about it, it sounds really amazing and exciting to think about maybe going to Asia one day.
It really, really is. And you, what I did lastly is you start to blend your own background and experience wherever you lived, grew up in America, to some of the Asian principles and philosophies, and it's a really nice marriage.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it really helps. It helps with the quality of living, with your depth in perceiving life and what really matters.
Thank you for sharing that. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So if anybody wants to reach out to you to ask about your experience or for advice, are you available for that?
I sure am. Yes.
Okay. How would they reach out to you?
So you can email me at Sheryl Smith. That's SHERYLSMITH 2016 at u.northwestern.edu. Sheryl Smith 2016 at u.northwestern.edu, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure talking with you today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Kim.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for listening to the Traveling Therapist podcast. For show notes, links, and downloads, head over to thetravelingtherapist.com, where you'll be able to learn more about my journey, the courses I've created for you, and other exciting resources to make your dreams become a reality. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share with your traveling therapist friends, subscribe to the podcast, and if you love this episode, please leave a review.